of shadows.
Hi my angels, it's Hailey Reese and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am so excited that you guys are here and I hope that you are having an absolutely fantastic morning, afternoon, or night, whatever it is for you, when this video finally reaches you. For today's video, we are diving into yet another true crime case, except today's video is the first of a new series I'm starting here on my channel called Kids That Kill. Recently, I've been looking into a ton of cases and I was absolutely mind blown, disturbed, and shocked to learn of how many murders were committed by children and young teens. So in this series, we are going to explore just that. Now today's video is absolutely heartbreaking and it's to do with the murder of a beautiful 9-year-old girl named Elizabeth Olten. This case is incredibly controversial, especially by the end of the trial. So definitely let me know all of your thoughts and opinions down below. And without further ado, let's get into today's case and the start of a new series. Playing outside with the neighborhood kids is one of my favorite childhood memories. But what happens when something so innocent turns sinister? Today we're diving into the brutal and senseless murder of 9-year-old Elizabeth Olten. A heartbreaking case solved in an unusual way. The discovery of a diary. This case begins in October of 2009 in St. Martin's, Missouri. So just 10 days before Halloween, October 21st, 2009 started off as just a typical Wednesday. By Wednesday evening, 9-year-old Elizabeth Olten was at home with her mother Patty and her older siblings Stephanie and Anthony. Elizabeth was rehearsing for an upcoming play she was set to be in and bothering her brother, and Elizabeth's mother Patty was just about to make dinner when they suddenly hear a knock on the door. Now at their door is 6-year-old Emma, a neighbor from just a few houses up the street. Now it wasn't uncommon for Elizabeth and Emma to play together. Actually, Elizabeth's mom described that the two would enjoy playing dolls together, playing outside. They really enjoyed spending time together. And Elizabeth's mom would also describe Emma as, despite being younger, the two got along very well. But on this particular evening, as I mentioned, Elizabeth's mom was just about to make dinner. So when 6-year-old Emma came knocking on the door, Elizabeth's mom was hesitant to let Elizabeth go out to play. Now the two started jumping around and begging Elizabeth's mom to let her go out to play. And so despite being reluctant, Elizabeth's mom, Patty, allowed Elizabeth to go outside on one condition. Elizabeth was to return home within the hour, which would be around 6 p.m., and then she could go out to play. And so, excited, Elizabeth headed out the door. Little did Patty know this would be the last time Elizabeth would be seen alive. Now, as I mentioned, Elizabeth and Emma playing together was nothing out of the ordinary. In fact, both households had children in them that were of the same relative age, and they would often all play together. All the neighborhood kids actually would often play together, which is not uncommon. I grew up enjoying playing outside with my neighborhood friends. They'd come knock on my door, I'd go knock on theirs. So to say that Patty had no idea what was to come next is an understatement. Now, Elizabeth's mom never had any previous issues with Elizabeth coming home on time. As I mentioned, mentioned, she told Elizabeth to be home around 6 p.m. And on this particular evening, the sun would actually go down at 6:30 p.m. Now, Elizabeth was absolutely terrified of the dark. So Elizabeth's mom never had any issues getting her home on time because Elizabeth would always want to be home before the sun would set. So when 6 o'clock rolled around and Elizabeth wasn't home, Patty had a bad feeling almost immediately. Now, Emma and her siblings lived with their grandmother who had full legal custody over them. And as the time was ticking on and the minutes were passing 6 p.m., as I mentioned, Patty was feeling uneasy because this was out of Elizabeth's character. So she decided to call Emma's grandmother and find out what the two were up to. To her absolute shock, she found out from Emma's grandmother that Elizabeth had never been to their home, that Emma was home, but Elizabeth had never been there. Now, immediately, Elizabeth's mom just knew something was wrong. Number one, Elizabeth was terrified of the dark, and as the minutes were ticking on, it was getting increasingly darker outside. Number two, Emma's grandma said that Elizabeth had never been there. So Elizabeth's mother called law enforcement. The police were there within 15 minutes to look for the girl. And I think what's so important to note is that right off the get-go, this was not deemed any bit of foul play. Actually, law enforcement believed that Elizabeth had maybe wandered off into the woods behind Emma's home or had lost her way somewhere and that she was just out there wandering. But Elizabeth's mom was not so sure. As I said, this was completely out of Elizabeth's character. So despite law enforcement speculating that they didn't feel as though at this given point in time any foul play was at play, Elizabeth's mom wasn't so sure. The community really came together. People were searching high and low for Elizabeth. Actually, by around 10 p.m., hundreds of people were looking anywhere and everywhere they could to find her. Now, when Elizabeth had left her home, she did leave with a cell phone, and her mother had been continuously calling Elizabeth's phone, but there was no answer. Every single time her mom would call, it was going straight to voicemail. The police contacted the cell phone company that Elizabeth's phone was with and ordered an emergency ping. 3 pings indicated that Elizabeth's phone was in the nearby woods behind Emma's house. Unfortunately, though, this ping from Elizabeth's phone only showed like a generic area, and the forest behind Emma's home was thick and covered a lot of land. So while it was a start, it also wasn't much to go off of. So at this point in time, the 2 main theories were that A, Elizabeth had wandered off and gotten lost, or B, Elizabeth had been kidnapped. The FBI actually got involved, and at this point, the search just went to a whole new level. As I mentioned, hundreds of volunteers were looking for Elizabeth. There were checkpoints set up. There were helicopters and planes flying above. There were also sniffer dogs and dive teams. Honestly, you guys, they were doing the absolute most that they could with the hundreds of volunteers and all of the law enforcement resources. And yet there was no sign or lead of where Elizabeth could be. As I mentioned, they were also super worried that perhaps Elizabeth had been kidnapped. So they even tracked down like any nearby or local sex offenders to ensure that they could like tick off the list all the different places and people that Elizabeth could be or could be with, and there was no luck. So I'm sure you're wondering at this point in this case, what on earth Emma had to say. Because as far as we know, Emma came to call on Elizabeth, they went out to play, and Elizabeth never returned home. Well, Emma was interrogated by the FBI, and initially her story claimed that the two had hung out for around an hour, and Elizabeth had started walking back home, and that was the last that Emma had seen her. But eventually, Emma's story started to change. Her story changed from her saying goodbye to Elizabeth and Elizabeth walking home to while Elizabeth and Emma were playing, Emma got caught in some thorn bushes and called out for her older sister Alyssa to help her. But at this particular point of the investigation, the FBI and law enforcement realized one troubling detail. All of the neighborhood children were accounted for. Their whereabouts during Elizabeth's disappearance was accounted for, all except for one. Emma's older 15-year-old half-sister, Alyssa Bustamante. So before we continue on, at this point in time, I'd like to give a little bit of a backstory of Alyssa Bustamante. Alyssa Bustamante also lived with her grandmother and her 3 siblings, Emma and their 2 brothers. Alyssa was the oldest of the 4 of them. Now, Alyssa's mom was an addict and her father was in prison, and at this particular point in time, despite her grandmother having full custody of her, Alyssa was in contact with her father. There were letters to and from prison, but her childhood was anything but easy. But despite her troubled childhood, she was really doing well in school. She maintained good grades, she had friends, and she was finding ways to express herself. But Alyssa really struggled with her mental health. She really struggled with self-harm, with no longer wanting to be on Earth, and her mental health was a really, really difficult challenge for her. And it almost seemed as though, alongside her mental health and her troubled past, she almost had these deep, dark emotions inside of her. On her YouTube channel that she created, one of her hobbies that she listed was killing people. At one point, prior to Elizabeth's disappearance, Alyssa had actually said to a friend of hers, "I just wonder what it would be like to kill someone. To see the life drain out of someone. I wonder what it would feel like. That type of power, to just take that away from someone." So it was made very clear as law enforcement learned more about Alyssa that she came from a troubled past and that she definitely was struggling with her mental health and these deep, dark emotions in her. But her grandmother and her family was trying their absolute best to fix everything and to help Alyssa. Now, obviously, once law enforcement realized that Alyssa was the only person or the only child in the neighborhood who hadn't been accounted for during Elizabeth's disappearance, and on top of that, after learning Emma's changed story of Alyssa being there, Alyssa was questioned by law enforcement. And initially, Alyssa was cool and calm and collected. Alyssa claimed that she had in fact skipped school that day. She was very aware of Elizabeth's disappearance, but she had no knowledge of anything that had transpired. Now, at the time of the FBI interrogating Alyssa, volunteers had found what appeared to be a shallow dug grave that had been filled back in behind Emma and Alyssa's house. So the FBI decided at this given point in time, for whatever reason, to bring Alyssa to said dug grave. And I put that in quotations because they were assuming it was a dug grave. It almost seemed as though it was the perfect size to put a small child in. And so FBI agents did bring her down to look at it. And what law enforcement noted was that Alyssa said she dug it herself. Now, obviously, they found this super strange, so they asked Alyssa, why would you dig this and then fill it back in? Alyssa claimed that she enjoyed digging, and she also enjoyed, finding dead animals and burying them. But many, members of law enforcement found that comment to be strange. Police and law enforcement were growing increasingly more suspicious about Alyssa, and there were also no other leads, so they were able to obtain a search warrant for their home. And when they went into Alyssa's room, it was deeply disturbing. I'm not going to go into full detail of these specific drawings and the things that they found, but you're more than welcome to search it up yourself. But upon entering Alyssa's room, there was writing and drawings on the wall that were deeply disturbing, not only because of the imagery of the drawing and the writing, but also because a good chunk of them were drawn and written in blood. Alyssa talked a lot about self-harm, and there was even this drawing of a figure with slashes on it that was labeled as Emma, her younger sibling, which was really unsettling. But the most disturbing of all would be found in the discovery of Alyssa's diary. Alyssa's diary was disturbing, to say the least. There was an entry about burning a house down and killing everybody within it. There was a lot of really unsettling entries in this diary. In an entry before the disappearance of Elizabeth, Alyssa wrote, "If I don't talk about it, I bottle it up, and when I explode, someone's gonna die. The very last page that had been written in this diary was written on the day of Elizabeth's disappearance. But the only thing that was really visible immediately off the get-go to law enforcement was the date and the final sentence, which read, "Now I gotta go to church. LOL." The rest of the entry had been scribbled out in blue pen, but this did not sit well with law enforcement. Following the discovery of Alyssa's diary, she was brought back in for questioning with law enforcement. And before entering the interrogation room, they actually put a backlight on the diary entry and were able to read at this point in time 2 more words, which was slit and throat. As this particular interview continued, Alyssa became increasingly nervous. As I mentioned before, she was like cool as a cucumber. She was really casual. But as this interview was going on and on, she was getting very uncomfortable. Just as they thought Alyssa was going to break, they decided to say something to her that would change the whole trajectory of this case. They told Alyssa, "We have your diary. We've read your diary. Even the last entry that was scribbled out." And at this point, Alyssa just broke. At first, Alyssa's story was the night of Elizabeth's disappearance, Elizabeth had fallen in like the forest, had hit her head, and had died immediately. Now, obviously, law enforcement was not buying this version of the story, and they proceeded to tell her that once they discovered Elizabeth's body, through autopsy reports, they would be able to determine the true cause of death. And it was at this point they decided to just ask Alyssa, "Did you slit Elizabeth's throat? Did you cut her throat?" And Alyssa said yes. Now, Alyssa's grandmother was in this interrogation room at this point in time, and at this point she just had to get up and leave the room. She was disgusted, heartbroken, shocked, and once she left the room, Alyssa told the truth of the situation, which makes me sick. What had truly happened was Alyssa had asked her younger sister Emma to go and call on Elizabeth. Once Elizabeth came out, she sent Emma home and held Elizabeth's hand, bringing her into that back forest. The two walked for 15 minutes, you guys, 15 minutes. As she told Elizabeth, "We're almost there. I really want to show you something cool. Come on, I want to show you this." She spent 15 minutes holding this innocent, beautiful 9-year-old girl's hand, telling her that she had something to show her. What she was truly doing was leading 9-year-old Elizabeth to a grave that Alyssa had dug prior. Actually, law enforcement would release 5 days at least prior to this event. She dug this grave site. She led Elizabeth there and proceeded to, like face to face, strangle the 9-year-old girl. She then pulled out a kitchen knife that she was armed with, and she stabbed Elizabeth and then slit her throat and threw her into the grave. Now, realizing that the jig was up, that she'd been caught in her disturbing crime, she led law enforcement to Elizabeth's body. It was a shallow grave, and actually law enforcement described it as like some of her limbs were still like poking out, like she hadn't buried her well at all. And to law enforcement's disturbing and heartbreaking realization, exactly what Alyssa had said happened matched the autopsy of the body of 9-year-old Elizabeth Olten. Law enforcement was able to discover later on exactly what Alyssa had written in that final entry, and you guys, it is so disturbing. After she describes the horrific act which she committed, she proceeds to say, "It was amazing. As soon as you get over the, oh my God, I can't do this feeling, it's pretty enjoyable. I'm kind of nervous and shaky though right now. Okay, I gotta go to church now. LOL." That is so disgusting to me. Like, it is so evident in that entry after what she had done that she had no remorse. She was a little shaky and gotta go to church now. But it was amazing. The brutal murder of a beautiful 9-year-old girl who, before coming home for dinner, decided to go out and play with her friend Emma. Makes me sick. Alyssa Bustamante was arrested. She was to stand trial as an adult for murder and armed criminal action for carrying a knife. Alyssa first appeared in court in November of 2009, where she pled not guilty. Now, Alyssa's defense claimed that she should get a lesser charge due to her mental health. They also argued that the medication that she was on at the time could cause impulsive, violent acts. But the prosecution said that Alyssa had every intention to kill. As I mentioned, they found out that that grave had been dug at least 5 days prior to her luring Elizabeth out of her home. She had sent her younger sister to go and get Elizabeth, sent her sister home, brought Elizabeth for 15 minutes into that forest, led her to the grave, choked her, and then killed her. It was so premeditated. It was not impulsive. As I also mentioned before, Elizabeth had written some really deep, disturbing things in her journal, on her walls, and like I mentioned, even on her YouTube page, one of her hobbies was killing people. It doesn't come off as impulsive. But due to the fact Alyssa had been asked questions while interrogated that were illegal under juvenile law in Missouri State, the court ruled that Alyssa's confession was inadmissible. Along with this, life sentences for minors without the possibility of parole were unconstitutional. Because of this, against the wishes of Elizabeth's family, Alyssa was offered a plea deal for a lesser charge. Alyssa would plead guilty to second-degree murder and armed criminal action, which infuriates me because, as I mentioned, this was very evidently and clearly premeditated. It wasn't impulsive. She knew exactly what she was going to do to this poor child before going there to have her sister get her. It makes me so sick. Alyssa was sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years for armed criminal action. She was given the possibility of parole after 35 years and 5 months. Now, Alyssa would address the family of Elizabeth, claiming that while she has absolutely no idea what they're going through, she's sorry, saying, "If I could give my life to get her back, I would. I'm sorry." Alyssa did try to appeal her sentence, but that was denied in 2014. Now, this particular case, you guys, has a ton of controversy. For one, there are plenty of people who believe that Alyssa deserves life in prison. She deserves to stay in prison for the rest of her life for what she did. But there are other people claiming that she was just a 15-year-old girl with a troubled past and she deserves redemption, so to speak. As for Elizabeth's family, they say that Alyssa has no idea how deeply she destroyed an entire family. Elizabeth's sister was asked what she would say to Alyssa if given the chance, and she said that she hates her. She would want her to know that she hates her and that she destroyed a family. And this whole case is so heartbreaking. I can't even fathom what Elizabeth's family has been through. And honestly, Elizabeth's mother believes that Alyssa is nothing but a complete monster. But as I mentioned, there is controversy with this case. There are people who believe that Elizabeth was a troubled young girl, that she should not be tried as an adult. She should be given a chance of redemption. And honestly, I personally think that through her journals and the signs and the way that she reacted afterwards, perhaps by imprisoning her, they prevented a potential serial killer. But I would love to know your guys' thoughts and opinions down below. Well, you guys, that is it for today's video. As I mentioned, I do know this case is super controversial in the sentencing. There are people who believe that Alyssa was a troubled young girl, and there are people who believe that she was a monster and she deserves to spend life behind bars. But as I mentioned, I would absolutely love to know what you guys think in the comment section below, and I hope that you guys are looking forward to this new series. If you guys are new to my channel or you are just not yet subscribed but you do enjoy my content, I would seriously love it more than you will ever know if you go ahead and click that subscribe button, and please give this video a big thumbs up if you did enjoy it. Remember, my loves, do all things with kindness, and until next time, I love you.